Hello everybody, and welcome to HowToWeb Live. My name is IORDACHE and I'm the founder of HowToWeb. In September last year, we were busy preparing the biggest ever edition of the HowToWeb conference, welcoming amazing speakers such as Sean Ellis, the inventor of growth hacking, Bob Mesta, the co-architect of the Jobs to be Done theory, April Dunford, the author of obviously awesome bestseller, Raul Popa, founder of Typing DNA, and many other exceptional founders and professionals. It turned out to be the best HowToWeb conference so far, and we miss it deeply. But times have changed, and we have to respond to change. We cannot meet in physical spaces, but we can still connect to the same heroes of the technology world who are building better products and faster growth. That's why today we're launching HowToWeb Live, a bi-monthly live show where we invite some of the stars of the technology world to share insights and lessons of their journey so far. During the broadcast, you can ask questions to our guests in the chat, and some of those questions will be picked up and answered live. Big thanks to Be Defender for powering this series and empowering our internet experience safety. Before the first episode, let's see what else is happening in the world of tech. Despite the pandemic, things haven't slowed down too much in European tech. Amsterdam-based Molly, a payment service provider targeting mid-sized business customers, has raised, for example, a 90 million euro Series B round, making it the latest European unicorn. While the San Francisco-based payment provider Verifone has acquired 2Checkout, a payment service with a strong presence in Europe and in Romania in particular. In the same time, Figma, the 2 billion Australian unicorn, continues its international expansion by opening a research and development office in London. If you're ambitious and hope that one day your company will be on that list, give it a look at Startup Spotlight Online, HowToWeb's matchmaking program and competition for early-stage startups from CEE. Startup Spotlight offers startups a customized schedule of meetings based on their business objectives, access to an incredible network of founders, investors, experts, and partners, and an over 100K investment award for the best startup of the program. Check out the details on howtoweb.com. Now, HowToWeb Live Episode 1. Our first guest is Emi Gal, founder and CEO of Ezra, a medtech startup who wants to dramatically reduce the cost of cancer screening using AI and MRI data. Previously, Emi was the founder and CEO of Brainient, who was successfully exited to Teads. The episode will be hosted by Ondrej Bartos, managing partner of Credo Ventures, one of the best venture funds in CEE, and also an investor in both Brainient and Ezra. So there's definitely a bond between these two, but let's hope we'll also hear some difficult questions. Or maybe it is you who will ask the difficult questions. Ondrej, Emi, welcome to HowToWeb Live.
But I felt there was something in this kid that was worth monitoring. So we stayed in touch, and the rest is history. I invested in his technically second startup, I guess. Now I invested in his third startup, and I guess we'll be talking about those later on. So welcome, Emi.
Thank you.
And please do your short introduction, if you will.
Thank you, Ondrej, and it's great to be here. It's my very first kind of Zoom conference, and I actually used to go to howtoweb back in the day when I was in London and Bucharest, and I'm excited. As Ondrej mentioned, we've known each other. He sometimes says that we've known each other since I was in kindergarten. Not entirely true. I was, I think, 19 when we met. And I actually vividly remember the day we met. Like you flew in from Prague to Romania for this event. And I looked at all of the people who were like in the jury for the competition at the event. And I emailed everybody. And the only one who responded was Ondrej. So right before the event, we had a coffee at the Marriott in Bucharest, and I showed Ondrej all that I was working on, and he was like, "Emi, you need to focus." And then we that's been a constant theme over the past decade or 13 years that we've known each other, and it's been a wonderful partnership in 2 startups now. So I'm excited about talking about those today. As for me, as you know, as Ondrej briefly mentioned, I'm on my third, or really second, real startup, and I currently run Ezra out of New York. And Ezra is a startup that's creating a new way to screen for cancer using MRI and AI. And we'll probably dive a little bit deeper into that over the next hour or so. Excited to be here and excited to take Ondrej's and your questions.
Great. Thanks for the intro, Emi. So as we had mentioned, so the first startup I invested in, founded by Emi, was Brainient. And that was, I believe, back in 2011 or 2012.
I think it was in 2011, yeah.
2011. And that was ad tech, advertising technology startup. Now, you know, probably many people know the story. We managed to sell it to Teads, which was one of the global leaders in video advertising. So we did well at the end. You joined Teads as CMO, I believe. You moved to New York. And then all of a sudden, well, not really true, we stayed in touch, but all of a sudden, Emi starts a new startup, which is not ad tech, and it's not quite, you know, simple tech or whatever, but it's health tech. Can you share a bit about your journey from ad tech, you know, Romania, London, over to, you know, saving lives, as the headline says?
For sure, yeah. So, you know, the kind of the full backstory is that Brainient was originally like an outsourcing software development shop, and we were just building software for others from Romania when kind of software development in Romania was still very, very, very cheap. And
then the episode with Brain TV, right? TV correct. For intelligent people.
We smart, yeah. So we started making some money with Brainient. Then I was like, what do I do? And of course, you go and you launch an online TV channel for smart people, which was, I think, to this date, it's still the dumbest idea I've ever had. But there was one interesting.
I'd say it's top three. Top three,
yeah. Yeah, the second idea would be just taking money from you. And Brain TV was obviously a failure, but there was one interesting thing that came out of it, which is that I learned that there were no good video ad servers out there. So kind of Brainient morphed into building an interactive video ad server that took me to London. We raised money from Seed Camp, from Ondrej, from a number of funds and investors in London, and then spent really 7 years building that and selling it. And we sold it in 2016 to Teads, as Ondrej mentioned. Now, I was at Teads for about 1.5 years, and even before we sold Brainient to Teads, I kind of had an interest in cancer. And the interest stemmed from two areas. One, I'm personally at high risk for melanoma because I have a couple of hundred moles on my body. That puts me in the highest risk bracket. And so from a very young age, I've had to get screened for melanoma. And when I was a kid, I actually had a scare because they found a mole that looked abnormal. Turned out to be fine, but it was lingering in the back of my mind that screening is important. And then in 2014, I think a friend introduced me to a nonprofit in Romania called Hospices of Hope, who build and operate hospices that care for cancer patients. And so I started volunteering for them, helping them out with digital stuff. And in being involved with hospice, I realized that most people who end up dying from cancer die because they were detected late. So I started looking at why so many people are detected late and realized it's because there's no way to screen for cancer everywhere in the body that's fast, accurate, and affordable. This was 2015 or so. And so when the day we sold Brainient to Teads, I was like, my next company is going to be around cancer and cancer screening. So I started researching and speaking to physicians and scientists and reading a lot of papers. And it was actually on my honeymoon that I was reading research papers. This was November 2016. That I was reading, obviously, as you do, you read research papers on your honeymoon, and I
Everybody
read
does
this.
that. No need to
Everybody does that.
explain. Yeah.
Of course, no, it's husband of the year right here. And I stumbled upon this paper that was comparing MRI with CT and ultrasound and X-rays and other medical imaging modalities in terms of accuracy for detecting cancer. And this paper was concluding overwhelmingly that MRI is better. So started doing a bit of research, and I was like, why isn't everybody doing an MRI every year? And realized that it's because MRI is very expensive as a medical imaging modality. So decided to start a company that uses AI and technology to make MRI-based cancer screening more affordable. And that's how Ezra started.
It's a cute story, but just to dig a little deeper, what interests me, and I'm not sure I've ever asked that question, is was it a coincidence? I understand your sort of relating to cancer patients and the passion for detecting cancer early or curing cancer even. I know you've had thoughts about curing cancer as well, but was it like a coincidence that led you to figuring out that it could be technology helping in the early detection? Or was it like your intention to find technology that can help with early cancer detection?
Yeah, so it was actually a very kind of deliberate process that I ran to find the right technology to detect cancer early. And actually, the full body, I was just shortcutting it earlier, but the full body MRI idea was the 12th idea that I had. Like, I had all these crazy ideas, from DNA-based nanobots that you would put in the bloodstream in order to bind to known cancer genes, digital microfluidic
I remember that
biochips.
one.
Yeah,
that was probably also top 3 dumbest.
Yes, yeah. It might work in a distant future, but like I basically decided that I was going to focus on cancer and focus on cancer screening, and spent about 18 months cycling through about a dozen ideas. And my process was that I would like read books, read papers, and then speak to, when I felt comfortable in a certain topic, I would email the best scientists in that space, and I would have a call or a meeting with them. And 11 times, people were like, nope, that's not going to work. Or that's going to work, but it's going to work in 5 to 10 years. And then when I stumbled upon MRI and full body MRI, the more people I spoke to who knew a lot more about the space than I did, the more convinced I became that it could work. And I didn't actually commit to it as a full body MRI idea until I had spoken to probably like a dozen scientists in the space who were like, yep, if you could make MRI cheap, it would be amazing, because it doesn't use radiation, so you could do one every day and you'd be fine. And it has high sensitivity and specificity. If only you could do it in like less than an hour in order to drive costs down. So then my focus shifted into, okay, how can we build a protocol that enables us to scan people in less than an hour? And then I have a computer science background, but I don't have a medical imaging or deep learning AI background. So I spent 9 months finding a co-founder, and I basically went through about 2,500 profiles of medical imaging deep learning experts in the world. I reached out to about 300, 153 responded. I know the number because I tracked it in like a CRM. And then I had 90 interviews over 9 months, and I selected 4 people that I took through a 3-month project that I paid for. And from all that process, Diego, who's my co-founder at Ezra, who's based in Toronto, was by far the best person. And Diego's did a bachelor's, master's, PhD, and postdoc in machine learning applied to medical imaging. And his doctoral thesis was in detecting or predicting epileptic seizures in MRI scans for children. So ended up like Diego ended up being like
Perfect match. Yeah.
Perfect
I know
match.
both your co-founder and your wife, and
Yep.
you have found yourself good matches. Perfect
Thank
matches.
you.
So, I mean, I have witnessed both of your serious startups, and I mean, I sort of feel like your path from Brainient to Ezra is a path from sort of the startup type of technology in search for a use case over to a startup with a use case in search for the technology, which
100%.
in my view is a lot better thing. There are, and especially in Central and Eastern Europe, we see so many technologies in search for a business model, a use case, a customer,
Yep.
product market fit and stuff like that. And we see so few sort of use cases that are in search
for
the technology.
I agree.
So,
yeah.
Do you agree?
I think, I think the best startups always have a North Star, and the North Star is very, very clear. And then they're just like finding tech to satisfy the path towards that North Star, which was not the case with Brainient. I kind of fell into ad tech. And with Ezra, it's very deliberate. It was like, we have a mission and the mission is very clear. And it's to detect cancer early for everyone in the world. So that's that drives all of our efforts in terms of finding technologies that can get us there.
So what technology saves people's lives at Ezra?
Yeah, so full body MRIs, as I mentioned.
In layman's terms, I mean, come on. You're talking to me,
I'll say it so that you can understand it. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yes, yeah. So full body MRIs, as I mentioned, have very high sensitivity and specificity, which are the two measures of accuracy for screening tests for detecting cancer in pretty much all the major vital organs in the body. The problem with MRI is that it's expensive to acquire a scan, because a full body MRI before Ezra used to take about 3 hours, used to cost about $10,000 to $15,000. And then it's expensive to interpret the scan. So like having radiologists reading the scan. And so what we decided was to use AI to decrease the interpretation time and decrease the scanning time. And we started with prostate. So we wanted to show that for a single organ in MRI, we can build an AI that can make the radiologist more efficient and potentially more accurate. So we built an AI that assists radiologists when interpreting MRI images of the prostate in order to help those radiologists be much faster. And the AI basically automates a number of the things that they do manually, such as measuring the volume of the prostate, the size of a lesion, segmenting the lesion if there is one in order to prepare for biopsy. And all of those, so reading a prostate scan without Ezra takes a radiologist about 20 to 25 minutes. With Ezra, it takes 5 to 10 minutes. And so we're improving the interpretation time substantially, which decreases the cost. And then what we're also working on is building AIs that will be used to decrease the scanning time even further. Our current full body scan is an hour, and we were working on making it even faster. And sometime next year, we think we'll be able to deliver a full body MRI that will take just 30 minutes.
Cool. Very, very cool. Glad to hear. So I just have one last question before we start taking questions from the audience, if there is an audience. Maybe it's just us two, but that
would be a great conversation.
But just one more question. So I couldn't help but notice that there are a couple of investors that have been at Brainient, and they also joined in Ezra. And I'm kind of guessing it was not a coincidence or accident, but you went to certain people before others. So
Yep.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what do you look for in an investor, and how many of your previous investors did you go to when fundraising for Ezra?
Yeah, so first I'll answer the second question first. All of the investors in Brainient that I invited into Ezra joined the Ezra round, and that's I think it was about 9 investors that were Brainient investors that I brought into Ezra as well. There were a couple that I didn't invite, and so there's that. And what I look for in investors as a founder is I look for an investor who is always there to help the founder when needed, who also stays out of the way when not needed, but that also keeps the founder accountable to deliver results, whatever the metric for measuring success is. And I'll say something, and I'm not saying it just because the interview is with Ondrej, but Ondrej is my very favorite investor in the entire world. Like there's a reason. There's a reason why we've been working together for more than a decade, which is that Ondrej really is always there for the founder, stays out of the way when not needed, but also manages to keep me always in check and stay focused and make sure that I'm committed to delivering results. So it's just been a wonderful partnership, and I strongly encourage everyone on this call who's looking for money to send Ondrej an email, because he's really one of the best ones, or the best one for me, but one of the best ones in general. And that shows through investments in Ezra, UiPath, etc.
I think I can confirm that. Anyway, let's move on to questions from the audience. There's a question from Vlad. Is it different raising money in the US comparing to Europe? If it is, how different is it?
Yeah, so I've now raised money in both locations. For Brainient, I raised money only in Europe, and for Ezra, I raised money only in the US, even though I brought investors from Europe into the Ezra round. And the main difference that I've seen is that investors in Europe are very, for the most part, I don't want to generalize, but they're very focused on the revenue numbers and, is the company growing revenue? Investors in the US are very focused on, is this company building great technology with a great team in a large market? And do we think that this could be successful? And they don't care as much about the revenue traction, especially in the early stages, which was pretty different from what I was seeing with Brainient in Europe. The second thing I've noticed is that there's a lot more density of investors of all kinds, from very early stage to a very late stage in the US. So I think it's easier to raise, or at least easier to raise large amounts of money in the US than it is in Europe. At Ezra, we've now raised $22 million across our seed and Series A. And I don't think that would have raised that much money if I would have done it in Europe.
And one of the reasons is that Europe is getting more and more competitive on the venture side, but it's nowhere close to how competitive the US market is. So, if we look back at Brainient, what happened at each of the rounds was basically we managed to get one term sheet, right? For a lead investor. At Ezra, I believe at Series A, we had 3 or 4 term sheets on the table that we were able to pick from, right?
Yep.
And that's basically the difference. So, competition's good, at least for the startup.
And my experience in the US is that it's very much a founder's market, because there are a lot of investors fighting for the best deals, whereas in Europe it's more of an investor's market, because the really, really, really good deals are actually not as many. So investors have options in Europe, whereas founders have options in the US.
Right. Okay, another question is how important is for a health tech startup to put their technology at use in times of crisis? And did the development of Ezra COVID 360 slow down other Ezra products?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so COVID was actually pretty tough for us as a company, because we went from scanning 100 people plus a month before COVID to scanning 0 people during COVID, because we didn't want to put people at risk, and we didn't want to we weren't actually able to scan people for about 3 months. And
it was 2 full months with a 0, right?
It was 2 full months. It was actually 2 full months with a 0, and 1 with some revenue, and then we started scanning people in June again. And so what we did is we tried adapting to see how we can actually help healthcare in the US, especially during COVID. And we used our knowledge and our technology and so on to launch a lung scan that was targeted at people who had had COVID, in order to see whether there's any potential long-term damage on their lungs caused by COVID. And that worked out well. And what we're now seeing is people who've had COVID are coming to get an Ezra full body MRI, because there's recent research to show that it impacts your heart, it impacts your kidneys, liver. And so you really want to get a look inside your body if you've had COVID, to make sure that there's nothing long lasting that could impair your health.
Right. And so there's another question which very much overlaps, but basically the question is, what is the status of COVID 360 product?
Yeah, we still have it. Like, we still offer a lung scan for members. US, what we've noticed is that because people have had COVID and they're coming to Ezra to get scanned, and Ezra is out-of-pocket pay, people are like, is this covered by insurance? And if it's not, they're less likely to buy it, because they're used to have insurance covering things that are related to ongoing care, which is different from screening, where people don't expect screening to be covered by insurance, or not to the extent that that Ezra does it. So we've actually seen a lot more people who were initially expressing interest in COVID 360 to sign up for the full body, because they're like, well, if I'm going to pay, I may as well pay for the bells and whistles. So
and talking about pricing, can we talk a little about what the price is for Ezra MRI scan, and where do you plan to take it as a price for sort of more mass audience, and if it ever will be covered by insurance?
Yeah, so our current price is around $2,000. So we have 2 packages: Ezra Full Body Plus, which is a full body MRI plus a chest CT of the lungs, because that's the best way to screen for lung cancer, and that's $2,350. And you can also pay monthly for $220 a month. And then we have the Ezra Full Body, which is $1,950, and you can also pay monthly. And then we have some more affordable packages. Our goal is to use AI and technology to improve our unit economics, in order to decrease the scanning time, decrease interpretation time, improve efficiency. And we think that long term, we will actually be able to get down to a 30-minute MRI, at which point we will be able to offer the Ezra Full Body for about $1,000. Don't have a time frame for when we'll be able to deliver that, but it's in the works, and at one point we will deliver it. We know what needs to be done, and we're doing it. It's just like very hard to pull off. So so we're still working on it.
Okay.
As for insurance,
go ahead.
We think insurance will cover it. Like at around $1,000, it starts making financial sense for insurers to offer it to their patients, because early cancer detection costs the insurance much less to treat than late cancer detection. So like, I'll give breast as an example. Treating an early stage breast cancer is just about surgery, which is about $50,000 in the US. Treating a late stage breast cancer with chemo and radiotherapy and so on can go upwards of $1 million. So we're talking, orders of magnitude more expensive. Therefore, insurance companies are very incentivized to find cancer early.
And not to talk just about money, we can also talk about the risks or actually chances for recovery, which are radically different for early detected cancer and late detected cancer. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so late stage cancer has 20% 5-year survival rate. So stage 3 plus, so 3-4 metastatic cancer, very few people survive, unfortunately. Early stage cancer, so stage 0, 1, 1 plus, 2, has an 80% average survival rate, 5-year survival rate. So really, you really want to make sure that if you ever get cancer, you find it early. And unfortunately, 1 in 3 people on average, and actually for men, 1 in 2 men will get cancer during their life. And so it's not as much, will I ever get cancer? It's like, when will I get cancer and will I find it early?
Okay. We have another question, which is, explain a little bit about how is the product development in a healthcare startup? Can you talk about product development?
Yeah, it's actually very hard, especially if you have to build software that needs to be approved by the FDA or cleared by the FDA. FDA is like the Federal Drug Administration. It regulates any software, medical device, or drug that gets to be used by individuals. And when you're building something that needs to be cleared by the FDA, you need to have very, very thorough quality systems in place, very, very thorough cybersecurity, very, very thorough kind of data practices. And so as a result of that, developing things in healthcare, if you want to do it right, which you have to if you want to get clearances, is much slower than just like ad tech development. In ad tech, we can just like build something, deploy it the next day, and that's it. With our AIs, if we want to publish a new version of the AI, we need to send a letter to the FDA. We need to, get the FDA to okay the data, etc. So it's a much more involved process. Therefore, it's much slower and it costs a lot more because you have to have layers of teams that are just responsible with quality and regulatory affairs, which is, I've learned the hard way that it takes much longer than you expect as a kind of first-time healthcare founder.
That's the downside of a startup that aims to save lives, right?
Yes.
It's not just, if people see the ad or they don't, because nothing happens if they don't. But you save the life or you don't.
And if you miss one, it's pretty bad. And so we put a big premium on just taking our time at Ezra to make sure that we do it right.
Yeah. So going back for a little bit to your co-founder. So you were talking about this, finding a co-founder process that you took, which is a very, very thorough and well thought through process. My question here is, did you really just look for the expertise and competence, or did you also have some kind of set of values in mind, or did you also look for the right culture and fit to you, or what was your thinking around this?
Yeah, sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I had a very well-defined criteria. The first one is I wanted someone who's an academic, who's like proven to know how to build deep learning architectures in medical imaging. And that's like a very, very narrow, well-defined criteria. The second was I actually wanted someone who's also a great engineer so that they can build like production ready systems and they're not just like a researcher. And three, I really wanted someone that I felt I could work with. And that's a little bit more kind of, I didn't define it with like XYZ, but I could feel it in working with people, which is why I designed a process where I was reading their papers to see if they're any good on paper. I was then working with them for 3 months, which would tell me, you know, can they write code that is good enough and can I work with them? And actually from the 4 that I spoke with, there were a couple that were really, really good technically, but I was like, I don't know that I would enjoy working with this person. And I kind of lucked out with Diego because, you know, it was, we get along incredibly well. We're like very complementary skills, incredible scientist and great engineer. So like it ended up being the perfect complement for me.
And he's incredibly patient, which is a must working with you.
Spoken from experience.
So we have another question which complements this topic, which is what type of culture do you target for at Ezra? And is the hiring process of each employee as performance driven as was the selection of your co-founder?
So the first question, what type of culture is, we really want to, and we defined it from day one because it's like I was second time founder and I knew how important culture is. And we're constantly iterating on it, but we wanted a culture that focuses on people who are entrepreneurial or kind of take initiative, a culture of people who just like are not assholes, you know, people that you would want to spend your time with and kind of brainstorm and write code, etc. And a culture of like experts. We have 7 PhDs on our team, ranging from like breast cancer to prostate cancer to deep learning experts in MRI, CT, etc. We have 22 scientific advisors who are not Ezra employees, but are advisors who help us across all of the different projects that we work on. And we were very deliberate about that culture from day one. And then we do run not as intense a process for every single new hire, but I do believe that our head of talent, Dave, screens about 100 people for every single person we hire. And so actually, Dave was the first hire Diego and I made because we really wanted to interview a ton of people before we decide who we bring on board for every single role. And we're a team of 30 now, and we've done a pretty good job hiring people. Like we've made some mistakes because mistakes always happen, but the quality overall is really, really high. It's the best team I've ever worked with.
Yeah, but they did make mistakes. I can confirm that as well.
Yep.
And they've been shouted at for those mistakes. Anyway.
Yep. Especially me by Ondrej.
So yeah, I mean Diego's great. We never shout at him.
No.
Anyway, another question from Alexei. What were the first things that struck you as a startup founder when you moved to the United States? What are the differences between and let me open this topic by saying that Emi wanted to go to the US already at Brainient, and his board stopped him a couple of times, which, by the way, looking back, might have been a big mistake.
That's why I don't listen to the board now. You know,
we could have, that's a different topic. I mean, let's keep it for another conference. So back to the question, what struck you as, you know, most different in the US from Europe?
Yeah, so the first thing that struck me was how culturally different the US is from Europe. You know, I'm like Romanian from Eastern Europe. We tend to be very direct. And if we don't like something, we say we don't like something, and we do it as directly as we see fit. The US is very different. It's like everything is great, everything is wonderful. People never give direct feedback, and people actually expect that direct feedback will not be given to them. And so that was a bit of a shock initially, and it took a bit of adjusting, because I would be my direct self, and I've learned in the US that that shocks people, both investors and team members and partners and so on. You know. And so I've tamed that down a little bit. And then the other thing is like how much more money there is in the investors' capital is in the US compared to Europe. It was initially it was shocking to me to see how much capital there is in New York alone. In the perimeter of 5 blocks, there are like 4 funds that each have hundreds of millions of dollars to deploy over the next 4 years, and they need to deploy it. Like it's like the investors gave them that capital in order to give it to startups, hopefully doing it well, but like they have to deploy that capital. So that was also, it took a bit of adjusting, and I have a lot of founder friends who are in London who are like, you know, it's a world apart in terms of access to large amounts of money in the US compared to Europe.
And on that note, there's another question, which is, do you think it is more difficult to build AI-based solutions for healthcare in the US compared to Europe, or is it easier? And also, do you plan to approach the EU market?
It's harder. So we have a quality and regulatory affairs expert at Ezra who has worked on both FDA clearances and EC clearances, which are kind of the European clearances you need for medical devices. And the FDA has a much higher level of regulatory scrutiny than the EU. I think the only area where the EU might have like more stringent regulation is around data privacy and security with all the GDPR stuff. But from a regulatory perspective, the US is kind of the hardest market, which is in a way good, because if you succeed in the US, then it's not necessarily easier, but like more straightforward to get EU clearances. And we plan to be in globally, so we plan to be in Europe at one point as well.
Yeah, that's one thing about Emi. He wants to basically conquer the world. It doesn't stop in the US. It starts there, but
it starts here.
It doesn't stop there. So in his wild dreams, it's you know, you name
everywhere.
it. China, Russia, Australia, whatever.
By Monday.
Well, yeah. ASAP, let's call it, shall we?
Yeah.
And there's a question, obviously, how is New York these days? And, you know, I've been trying to avoid the, you know, COVID situation topic, but how's New York?
Yeah, the rumors of New York ending are greatly exaggerated. It's like, it was hard during COVID for the first few months, and then it was hard because there were like a protest because of police brutality in the US against Black people. And then it was the summer came, and summer in New York is like super hot and humid and like unpleasant, and everything was shut down for a few months. So it was like, it was eerie to go on the street and like on Fifth Avenue, and there was no one around. Everything is now kind of reopened. So restaurants have reopened, museums, bars, cafes. The only thing that hasn't really reopened in New York is offices. So like, other than people not having to commute back into New York all the time to go to their office, everything seems to be back to some more normality. And I'm a huge fan of New York. I think it's the best city in the world. So I'm enjoying it here, even though the past few months were pretty difficult.
Well, let's just hope New York stays the best city in the world. There are definitely voices who claim that it's losing position, but anyway.
It's not the first rodeo for New York in terms of like hard things, from, we're September 10th, tomorrow September 11th. So the city's been through many hard periods, and it's always come back. So I have high degree of confidence that's going to happen.
There's a bunch of questions around the AI and the tech behind Ezra. I don't think we'll have time to go through them. Just probably to sum up, are you planning to be active in terms of issuing white papers or researches? Are you up for FDA clearance of anything? Where are you there?
Yeah, so
how well you work with the scientific community?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have 7 PhDs on our team. My co-founder is a postdoc. Is published very well cited papers around medical imaging and deep learning. Ezra, we published 2 papers last year. We presented at the Computer Assisted Radiology and Surgery Conference, which is kind of one of the large conferences in medical imaging, and we have 2 FDA clearances that we'll have announcements about over the next 6 to 12 months. And we have an entire kind of regulatory team now that ensures that everything we do from an AI perspective satisfies regulatory body scrutiny, which is really, really hard to do. And I'm really proud of what our team has managed to achieve on that front.
Okay, I am too.
Thank you.
I am too. And another question is, what is your advice to a startup from Romania that is at the beginning and wants to address to global market? Should they choose a couple of countries or make it worldwide? What should they do?
Yeah, so the first thing is have a North Star. So choose a problem to solve more so than a technology. And this is kind of to Ondrej's point earlier. I can't stress how important that is, because that North Star then kind of guides all of your decisions and helps you know where you're heading, and if you're just starting with the technology and trying to find an application for that technology, you won't necessarily know where you're heading. That's first. The second one, I think it's much easier to succeed if the founding team, or at least the founder CEO, is in one of the big hubs in the world, lives in one of the big hubs. So like London, Berlin, New York, San Francisco, LA. There are probably others, but these are the main ones. You can't, you'll have to work really hard, irrespective of whether you're in Bucharest or in one of these cities, but you'll have a much higher probability of success if you're in one of these cities. And from Romania, it's probably easiest to go to London or Berlin as the first step, with the caveat that if you want to build a global company, at the end of the day, you have to be in the US. The biggest European success that I know of closely, and that Ondrej knows of even more closely, is UiPath and Daniel. And they would not have succeeded if Daniel would not have moved to New York to the extent that they did.
Couldn't agree more. It's in my head when I'm asked this question. In my head, it's always, there is no local or regional business. There's business. So, if you're in it for a cause, if you have this North Star, if you want to solve a real problem, then your playing field is global. And sometimes in some situations it might be useful to start in a market or 2 markets to test waters, but in general I would urge people to start global from day one, with the mindset, with the sort of language, availability, customer service, just go global. And then, and only then, you can become a UiPath or an Ezra. or whatever, or typing DNA, or other of our cool portfolio. Okay, it's time for the last question, and I guess I'm gonna pick plans for the future with Ezra, and how much is Ezra mission personal to you, Emi?
Mm-hmm. So I'll start with the second one. Ezra mission is very personal to me. I am personally at risk for cancer, as I mentioned earlier, for melanoma. So I've always felt like a connection to this space. And since we launched Ezra, we've scanned about under 1,000 people. We've helped 42 people find cancer, and some of these people have now gotten treatment and they are cancer free. And just a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from an Ezra member who is 36, and he just got a scan because a friend of his had cancer, and he was like concerned. He didn't have any symptoms, and we found that he had a brain tumor, and he had surgery. He doesn't have a brain tumor anymore, and his doctor told him that if not for Ezra, he would not have found it for 5 to 10 years until it would have become symptomatic, and at which point he would have been late. And this guy is 36 with a 9-month-old child at home. So that really makes the mission very, very personal when I hear those stories, and I'm like, we're actually helping people. In terms of plans for the future, our mission is really to detect cancer early for everyone in the world, and that's our North Star. And we will invest in technology across any spectrum, from imaging to other types of tests, in order to achieve that mission. And if you look at the numbers, 18 million people every year find cancer, and about half of them find cancer late. So 9 million people this year will detect cancer late, and we want those people to detect cancer early. And so to get there, we're probably going to have to screen 50 to 100 million people a year, because we're obviously not going to find cancer early for everybody we scan or screen. And that's our North Star. When we get to finding cancer early for 9 million people, that's when we know we'll have achieved our mission.
And we love that mission and vision. It is personal for me as well. Not that Emi was not instrumental reason for me to invest in Ezra, but also my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer late. So, he did not survive the 5-year horizon. So I feel quite passionate about that as well. And that is the main reason why I wish Ezra all the best, not just to become rich or richer. Anyway, this was the last point. I believe that's the right one. Thank you, Emi, for talking to me. And
it was fun.
I'll see you next week at the board meeting.
Absolutely.
Prepare for some shouting.
Of course, I'm used to it.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon, hopefully in person.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks for watching, and for those who haven't got their questions answered, you can reach out to Emi and Ondrej on LinkedIn. Thanks BDefender for supporting HowToWeb Live. Keep an eye on HowToWeb's social media channels for the recording, podcast, and blog posts of this episode, and share this experience with your friends. Next time, join us for another live episode of HowToWeb Live with Bob Mesta, co-architect of the Jobs to be Done series, and Valentina Radu, founder and CEO of OmniConvert, discussing Bob's newly launched book, Demand-Side Sales, a fresh perspective on how clients hire products to achieve progress towards their goals. See you soon on your screen. Bye-bye.